Hi everyone, this is Sean from Hancock Guitars, here for Australian Luthier Supplies for another FAQ session where I answer some of the questions that we've been asked during the week about various products that we sell. I'm going to give you a tip first, which isn't exactly a question, but it's a really useful and time-saving thing if you're doing a lot of guitar work. Now sometimes you need to take the strings off a guitar either at the bridge end or especially the headstock end. You'll have found that the strings will often get in a tangle if you do that because you've got all 6 strings off. What you can do to avoid that mess is actually wrap some, this is bundling film, around the strings fairly tightly. You can use tape for this, but it's a bit harder to get it off, so try to get yourself some of this bundling film. And what that does is holds the strings kind of in place on the fretboard so that if you take them off, for instance, if we take these off this end, you can work on this part of the guitar with no strings on there, but the string doesn't come off and get in a tangle up here. And when you go to put the strings back on there, if you've got all 6 strings, it's a lot easier to put them back in order and reattach them. The next thing I want to talk about is radius gauges. I had a question this week from a customer who was inquiring about our 2 sets of radius gauges at Australian Luthier Supplies, the understring version and the set of 2. These are both really great sets, but if you have to choose one, I'd generally go for the understring version. The reason for that is it will do both under the strings, so you can fit it in, turn it and measure under the strings, and also it does over the top of the strings. So that's the wrong gauge, but you can run through your gauges and find the correct one. Now the only downside of these is it's a little bit more time consuming when you want to find the correct radius of, say, a blank fretboard like this one or a guitar when you've got the strings off, because you kind of got to fiddle through the 9 gauges and find the right one. Not too bad, but if you're doing a lot of work, it can be a good idea to also invest in a pair of the standard radius gauges like these ones. They're super quick to just find the right gauge, and you can also sort of read them very easily and know, oh, there's the 12-inch or there's the 10-inch, and straight away go for that. If you're doing like a lot of fretboards, fretting work and that sort of thing, it might be worthwhile getting both sets of those gauges. But if you only want to get one, just get the understring ones. And the final question I had was about Tusk nuts. Now I had a customer, he actually had a classical guitar, but he had a fretboard width of 50 millimeters, and we don't have a nut that's exactly that wide, so he was wondering whether the 51 millimeter nut would be okay for his guitar and how to go about that. So I said yes, and the reason for that is all you have to do if you have a nut that's a bit wider than the fretboard, such as this one, you can see, it's hard to see, but that's about 1 millimeter wider than the fretboard, but that's okay. As long as it's not too much wider, you can actually just sand a little bit off the ends of that nut, just with some fine sandpaper on a block. This is stick-it sandpaper, and just evenly sand the same amount off each end until that nut would fit in there and be the right width. There is a limit to what you can get away with. You don't want the slots to be too close to the edge of the nut. So it depends on the nut a little bit, but 1 millimeter is totally fine usually, even potentially up to 2 millimeters if the slots are a fair way off the edge. Different Tusk nuts have different sort of slot widths off the edge of the fretboard. So that's about it for this week. If you think of any questions that you think would be suitable for this segment, please leave them in the comments below and I'll try to get to them in the next Luthier's FAQ. Thank you for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel.